In 2015, 35-year-old Michelle Blair was living in Detroit with her 4 children. She was struggling to keep a job, and eventually she was evicted from her apartment. March 24th of 2015, she was served with an eviction notice, but she was not there. So a crew went inside of the home and began removing furniture. As the crew begins removing furniture, they find a frozen body inside of a white deep freezer. Once police arrive, they make another discovery and find a body of a boy underneath the body of the girl in the freezer. Police find Michelle at another neighbor's home with her other 2 children, aged 8 and 17. But her other 2 children, 9-year-old Stephen and 13-year-old Stoney, were missing. After some brief questioning, Michelle is taken into custody. As she is being taken away, she says, "I'm sorry." Police take the frozen bodies to the morgue to thaw out so an autopsy can be performed. When the autopsy is performed, they do confirm that it is her 2 children, Stephen and Stoney. The autopsy determines that the cause of death is homicide and that the bodies have been in the freezer for at least a couple years. Michelle immediately confesses to the police that she did murder the 2 children for sexually assaulting her youngest son. Michelle had come home from work one day back in 2012 and saw her youngest son playing with dolls in a sexual way. She asked her son had anyone ever done that to him, and he had said yes, his brother Stephen. Michelle said that she went upstairs to confront Stephen and that Stephen did admit that he sexually assaulted his brother. So Michelle began punching and kicking him and put a bag over his head until he lost consciousness. Michelle also admits to abusing him further and making him lose consciousness again. After 2 weeks of torture, Stephen passes away from his injuries on August 30th of 2012. That's when Michelle Blair put the body of her son, Stephen, in her deep freezer. Just 9 months after the murder of Stephen, Michelle finds out that her daughter, 13-year-old Stoney, was also sexually assaulting her youngest son. So Michelle began starving Stoney and beating her until she passed away on May of 2013. She then put Stoney's body on top of Stephen's in the deep freezer and went on living like nothing even happened. Stephen and Stoney were in the deep freezer for almost 3 years. While in court, Michelle tells the judge that she feels no remorse for what she did, that the children felt no remorse for what they did to her son, and that she would do it again. Michelle Blair does plead guilty to 2 counts of murder and is now serving a life sentence.
Have you guys heard about this crazy incest case between father and daughter? In 1995, 20-year-old Stephen Plato met 15-year-old Alyssa Gracia, and they both ended up having a child, a baby girl named Denise. When they had Denise, they began to struggle financially, and Alyssa also noticed that Stephen began physically abusing their daughter. So she decided that it would be best that they give her up for adoption. In 2016, Denise is all grown up. She's 18 years old, and now her name is Katie. She decided that she wanted to locate her biological parents, Stephen and Alyssa, and she actually began to live with them. When Katie moved in with her biological parents, Alyssa noticed that Stephen started acting very different, and also he began to dress a lot better, and she just thought it was really weird. In 2017, Katie got pregnant, and guess who the father was? Her own father. 2 months after Stephen and Alyssa's divorce was finalized, Katie and Stephen got married. When they gave birth to their baby boy, they were then arrested and were charged for incest, and later on they were set free on bond. In 2018, Katie began to see a different side of Stephen, so she decided to end the relationship. What happened after is devastating. Stephen took their newborn baby, he suffocated him and then put him in a closet, and then he shot and killed Katie and her adoptive dad, and then he turned the gun on himself.
Gone girl, gone wrong. This is the case of Sherri Papini. On November 2nd, 2016, 34-year-old Sherri Papini, a wife and mom of 2 kids, vanished in broad daylight. It seemed to have been an abduction while she was out on a run near her home in Redding, California. Her family, police, and community searched everywhere. Her husband tracked her phone via Find a Phone app and found it on the side of a road with strands of her hair. They feared the worst. Missing signs, searches, California and the states surrounding it were being searched high and low for Sherri. This was major media attention. That was until Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 3 weeks after she had gone missing. Sherri reappeared on the side of a highway. She's seen here on video footage. She was found with a bag over her head, a broken nose, hair cut off, and was chained at the waist and wrists 140 miles away from her home. She had also been branded on her right shoulder. Sherri said she was kidnapped by 2 Hispanic women with a handgun and a dark-colored SUV, even going into detail about their appearance for a police sketch. She said she suffered reported beatings while being held captive. When police asked her what the kidnapper's motive was or why they released her, she didn't know. Sherri's husband and family were relieved that she was home, but law enforcement began having doubts about her uncorroborated kidnapping. One day, the sheriff's office received a phone call from a man who told them that Sherri was actually with him the entire 22-day period she was supposedly being held captive. He said, basically, that it was a hoax. This man was supposedly an ex-boyfriend of hers. According to the DOJ, evidence found that Sherri fabricated the entire ordeal, even going as far to harming herself to make her story more believable. On March 3, 2022, Sherri was arrested on charges of making false statements to federal law enforcement officers and mail fraud. To make things even worse, from 2017 to 2021, Sherri received $300,000 from the California Victims' Compensation Board. Sherri is now in custody and is considered a flight risk. What do we think?
Today we are talking about Dorothy Jane Scott. Early in 1980, Dorothy Jane Scott began receiving threatening phone calls at work. She was a single mother of a toddler who didn't think much of the calls at first until one night when the sinister voice over the phone told her to look outside. A single dead rose was laying on the windshield of her car. The stalker who had gotten a hold of her number would go between professing his love for her and threatening bodily harm to her. Dorothy mentioned to several family members and friends that the voice over the phone sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place who he was. She never got a chance to find out. One night at a staff meeting, Dorothy noticed one of her coworkers looked ill. She and another colleague drove the man to a nearby hospital. The doctor said he had a nasty spider bite and needed a prescription. While the 2 coworkers were waiting for the prescription to be filled, Dorothy went out to the parking lot to get her car. It was the last time she was seen alive. Her coworkers testified that after she did not return, they went out to meet her in the parking lot. At that moment, they saw her car speeding away, so they assumed there was an emergency with her son. Dorothy never returned home to her son, nor did anyone hear from her again. 4 years later, her charred bones were found at a construction site. Adding another layer of mystery to the case is the fact that a set of dog bones was found right next to her remains. Although people on the internet are still discussing the case today, no one was ever convicted or held in suspicion, and the mysterious caller was never found. That is the case of Dorothy Jane Scott.
Last known pictures of people before they went missing, part 1. Pictured here is journalist Kim Wall after she boarded a submarine with the intent of interviewing its owner, Peter Madsen. Peter is the other person standing in the picture with her, and after this picture was taken, she disappeared. Days later, Kim's torso would wash up on shore with 15 stab wounds. Over the next couple months, 2 plastic bags would wash up containing Kim's head, legs, clothes, and a knife. Soon after, a saw would also be found. Within the next month, her arms would also be found. It was soon revealed that Peter had tortured and dismembered her and threw her body out in the sea. He was sentenced to life in prison.
A young woman in Malaysia was this close to being saved on 2 different occasions, but she would still end up dead. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Canny Ong. Viewer discretion is advised. Canny was born on July 18th, 1974 in Malaysia. Now, eventually she would end up going to school in Hawaii, and she met her future husband, Brandon, in Los Angeles. Now, in June of 2003, Canny's father was unfortunately going through cancer. So she and her husband flew out to Malaysia to be with him. So they were there for a few weeks, and her father's condition was actually improving. So the plan then was to fly back to Hawaii on June 14th, 2003. The night before, on June 13th, 2003, her and some family and some friends all went out to dinner. And this was in Kuala Lumpur. When they were done, Canny had her mother and sister wait outside the restaurant while she went down to the car park to pick up the vehicle. A process that should have taken just a couple of minutes, but after 20 minutes, she never came back up. Her family obviously became worried. They tried calling her phone, but no one answered. So they went down to the car park to see what was going on, and the vehicle, a purple Proton Tiara, was missing. And Canny was also missing. So the family and friends immediately went to police, and they were able to get CCTV footage of the car park. They picked up this image. They also found images of Canny. What the footage showed was Canny being abducted by a stranger, by this man right here. The next day, June 14th, 2003, sometime around noon, police noticed the Proton Tiara, and they approached it. And inside was Canny Ong, and she was still alive. And in the vehicle with her was this man, later identified as Ahmad Najib Aris. Police asked them both for their IDs, and they both obliged. Canny appeared to be giving some hand gestures towards the police, like, hey, help me. But they weren't picking up on the signals. So when police went back to the car to check the IDs, Ahmad sped off, and the police shot at the vehicle. A few hours later, another witness saw the Proton Tiara with Canny Ong, again still alive. Again, gesturing towards this witness to please help, but before the witness was able to do anything, the man, Ahmad, sped off again. Sometime between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. under a bridge under construction, Ahmad sexually assaulted Canny and then stabbed her to death. Canny's burned remains would be found later in a hole under that same bridge, and the car was found abandoned. Due to the amount of witnesses that saw him, Ahmad was arrested and charged with the murder. He was convicted and sentenced to death, and he was hanged in 2013.
This is Randy Stair, aka Andrew Blaze. He was a YouTuber and he had a really big audience. His channel started out funny and entertaining, but his subscribers quickly watched him go down a steep decline in his mental health and grasp on reality. During this decline, he spoke very openly about his idolization of the Columbine shooters and his desire to want to be with a cartoon character romantically. He then went on to document his plan to commit a mass murder, and his subscribers did absolutely nothing to help him or stop this mass murder from happening. Randy was 24 years old at the time, and he was working at a supermarket, which he worked at for the past 7 years, and he lived in Pennsylvania. Pretty shortly before the mass murders took place, Randy was working on a fan fiction video series called Ember's Ghost Squad. It was inspired by the cartoon character Ember McLean that was from the Nickelodeon TV series Danny Phantom. And Randy greatly identified with Ember. And in one of his last vlog posts, he claimed that Ember wanted him to murder because her ghost squad needed more souls. On Ember's Ghost Squad, Randy took the persona of Andrew Blaze, which was a character he made that was actually a female despite the masculine name, which was a manifestation of Randy's gender dysmorphia. Randy also admitted in one of his YouTube videos that he enjoyed cross-dressing and would love to undergo a sex change. But on the other hand, in his journal, he's writing that he is a racist and a homophobic. But in his final and last video, he states that he is just a female trapped in a male's body, and that the girl in him is clawing to get out. Randy was never officially diagnosed with anything, but there is huge speculation that he had some type of mental disorder. And he even went as far as going out and buying the same outfit that one of the Columbine shooters wore the day of the shooting. Just a couple weeks before the murder, Randy takes his camera and videotapes his entire supermarket and shows all his fans where the murder is going to take place. June 7th of 2017, at approximately 10:52, Randy arrives for his scheduled shift at the supermarket. Randy had worked the overnight shifts for the past 7 years. And I'm going to need a part 2, so like and follow, and I will post it immediately after this. Part 2 of Randy Stair, aka Andrew Blaze. We left off with it being the night of the mass murder. Randy has arrived at his shift at the supermarket that he works at. It is about 10:52 p.m. Randy begins doing his normal work. He's stocking shelves, cleaning, and doing everything that he normally does. And then he stops what he's doing and begins to block all of the emergency exits in the supermarket. He had barricaded all the exits with wooden pallets. His 4 co-workers that were working that evening were Kristen Newell, Victoria Brong, Brian Hayes, and Terry Lee Sterling. After Randy's done barricading all the emergency exits, he begins tweeting a goodbye and farewell to all of his fans, and he also starts tweeting out links to videos that he had recorded over the past several years. It's almost midnight now, and Randy goes to his car and texts his mom and tells her where to find a journal that has all the planning of the events that are about to take place. He also tells his mom what he wants her to do with his remains once he is found dead. Randy then puts on black eyeliner and black lipstick to resemble his favorite cartoon character, Ember, from Danny Phantom. He then retrieves a duffel bag in his vehicle that has 2 shotguns and ammunition. Randy then enters the supermarket and begins opening fire. He finds Victoria first. She's standing in the grocery aisle. He shoots her twice. Kristen is in the same aisle, but she had headphones on, so the gunshots were muffled. But she did look over and saw Randy standing over Victoria, and he began to shoot her 2 more times. For some reason, Randy decided to spare Kristen, and he makes his way over to the next aisle where Terry was. He shoots him twice in the back. Kristen runs over to Victoria, and even though Victoria is badly bleeding, she still has a heartbeat. Kristen then calls 911. While on the phone with 911, Kristen manages to force the pallets off of the exits and get out of the store safely. Back inside the store, Randy then goes to the bakery aisle and finds Brian, and he shoots him 5 times. Randy then realizes that Kristen got out successfully, and he decides to just walk around and shoot random objects in the store, including some propane tanks. He was hoping that they would explode, but since they didn't, he walks back to the bakery aisle, puts the gun in his mouth, and shoots himself. Unfortunately, Victoria, Brian, and Terry were all killed that night. And Kristen is the only one who survived.
Y'all, I just finished this episode of Dateline called The Prussian Blue Mystery, and I'm disturbed. This is Brigitte Yuto. She was admitted into a San Diego ER with some symptoms of a mystery illness. So the doctors start running all these tests, y'all, for months and months and months. They could not figure out what's wrong with this woman. They were like, okay, this is truly a medical mystery. We don't know what's wrong with you. So they keep running all these tests. In the midst of them running all these tests, the woman is like rapidly deteriorating. I mean, y'all, this poor woman was losing her hair. She couldn't feel her extremities. She felt like her skin was on fire. She was losing her vision. So one of the doctors was like, okay, well, hair loss is associated with chemical poisoning. So he starts running all these tests to test her to see if she was exposed to a particular chemical. Y'all, her test came back and showed that she had been exposed to a chemical named thallium. She had more than 1,000 times the acceptable limit in her bloodstream. So the doctors were like, how in the world is she ingesting this? They were like, it's not like it's an easy chemical to get a hold of. So of course they start looking at the husband. So they find out that her husband has a hobby of collecting plant seeds that are used to make poisons. So come to find out, this man had been poisoning his wife's food with thallium for months and months and months and months, watching his wife rapidly deteriorate for months, all because he had a little sugar mama on the side and he wanted a divorce. Now, thankfully, they were able to find an antidote, and the woman did end up surviving, and her little punk-a husband ended up getting 21 years to life.
Okay, I want to talk about something that's really, really bugging me. Do you guys know about Kyron Horman? He's the little boy that went missing in 2010, I believe. This guy right So he went missing in 2010. No one's seen him since. That's what he looks like. And no one's been convicted. No one's been found guilty. And it's just like, it just makes no sense. He just vanished into thin air. Like, I was watching the documentary, Little Boy Lost. You can find it on Prime. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. So I was watching that documentary, and it's about Kyron Horman. And I was thinking to myself, why does this feel so familiar? Something about this story seems very, very, very familiar. And I did some digging, and I don't know. This is just matter for opinion. Just hear me out. Okay, so this is a press conference that was held for Kyron Horman. So the woman holding the tissue, that is his biological mother. The woman that is consoling her is Terry. She is Kyron's stepmother, the last person to have ever seen Kyron alive, okay? This is a close-up. So if you look at her face, you can tell that she's extremely devastated, but look at her face. Look at her face. It's almost like she's in disbelief for all the wrong reasons. So, like, the more I was paying attention to this documentary, the more pissed off I was getting, because I'm like, how is this unfolding and not closed? Why is this case still open? No one has seen him since. So when I was thinking about it and I was like, why this feels so familiar, I came across this. So this is a press conference for Gannon Stoke. That's Gannon Stoke's biological mother. So she's devastated. You can see it all over her face. The person responsible for her son's death and disappearance was this woman, Letitia Stoke. Look at her face. Notice how she has absolutely no emotion on her face whatsoever. Not only that, but she was the last person to see Gannon alive, and there were a whole bunch of things that pointed in the direction that she was guilty. On top of that, her interview, she couldn't even look at the camera. And when she did, blank stare. I just put these two together for a reference, but Gannon Stoke's stepmother, Kyron Horman's stepmother. No expression whatsoever. Both women were the last ones to see their stepsons alive. Both women had issues with their stepson. Both women have hours of unaccounted for activity. Both women look super, super shady. Kyron Horman's stepmom failed a lie detector test. Letitia Stoke is in prison. So why is this case not solved? There's so much more that I could talk about, and I'm probably going to, but how is it all of this evidence is piled against Terry, yet she's never been named an actual suspect?
Okay, a document has been released on more details of this, and y'all, the shit makes me fucking sick. I am gonna go ahead and read it through from the document exactly, because there's a lot of information. This is the document we have. On August 7th, 2021, Santa Barbara PD Officer Barriga spoke to Abby via telephone regarding her husband, Matthew. Abby reported to SBPD that she, her husband, and their 2 children planned on going on a camping trip. Abby said that instead, Matthew had left the residence in their family's Mercedes Sprinter van with the 2 children. Abby reported that Matthew did not tell her where he was going and did not answer her text messages. In addition, Abby was concerned because Matthew did not have a car seat. Abby asked the officer to contact him via telephone. Abby further stated she did not believe that Matthew would harm her children, nor did she believe her children were in any danger. She also believed that he would eventually return to their residence. The officer attempted to contact Matthew via telephone but received no response. The officer offered to meet Abby in person. Abby declined and requested no further assistance. Abby followed up the next day on August 8th and spoke with another officer. At approximately 6:59 p.m., Officer Michael Chung responded to Abby's residence in Santa Barbara and met with her. She reiterated everything mentioned previously and then also said she did not have any problems with Matthew and they didn't have any sort of argument prior to him leaving. Family members reported that they were unable to telephonically reach Matthew. Officer Chung asked Abby whether she could attempt to use the Find My iPhone app and locate him. And this is when they found the last known location in Rosarito, Baja California. And then on the 9th, that's when he was located, returning from Mexico. Matthew was taken into an interview and he waived his rights and agreed to speak with the agents. Matthew confessed to killing his children and said he drove his children to Mexico on Saturday, August 7th, 2021. Because he did not have a car seat, he placed his youngest child in a box and departed without Abby. Matthew stated he believed his children were going to grow into monsters, so he had to kill them. Matthew stated he first killed his younger child first using a spear fishing gun, piercing her in the heart. Matthew stated that his son did not die right away. He described that he had to move the spear around, thereby cutting his hand in the process. Marks were observed on Matthew's hand, consistent with his statement. After he killed his children, Matthew stated that he moved their bodies approximately 30 yards away and placed them in some brush. The location he provided agents coincided with where they were found. Matthew explained that he was enlightened by QAnon and Illuminati conspiracy theories and was receiving visions and signs revealing that his wife possessed serpent DNA and had passed it along to his children. He said that he was saving the world from monsters. Matthew stated that he knew it was wrong, but it was the only course of action that would save the world.
So I had never heard of this case prior to this comment, and I did some research on it, and it really is a baffling case. Let's get into it. Bryce Laspisa was last seen in August of 2013 in California. His disappearance remains unsolved to this day. By all accounts, Bryce was your average teenager. He was in college, taking summer classes, he had friends, a girlfriend, he partied. He didn't really do anything that anybody would think was out of the ordinary. But when he got back to school in August of 2013, those around him noticed that his behavior was becoming a bit worrisome. He was drinking every day, he was acting different, and when pressed by his girlfriend Kim, he eventually admitted that he had been taking Vyvanse. Kim became concerned about his behavior, and the more she pressed him, the more he pulled away. Eventually, he basically just told her that she would be better off without him, effectively ending their relationship. For some unknown reason, that same day they broke up, Bryce would show up at Kim's apartment. Kim tried to take his car keys away and get him to lay down and sleep rather than getting back on the road, but Bryce wasn't having it. He actually wound up calling his mother. He passed the phone to Kim, the two of them spoke, and it seems like his mother was able to convince Kim to give Bryce back his car keys. Bryce left Kim's apartment around 11:30 that night, and this is where things start to get a little bit strange. The next morning, the Laspisas would get a call from their insurance company inquiring about a roadside assistance call. They didn't know anything about it, so they tried to call Bryce to see if maybe he had gotten into an accident or had some car trouble, but they weren't able to get a hold of him. It was at this point that they spoke with his roommate, and his roommate let them know that Bryce had never come home that night. They did some digging, and they were able to track down the repair shop that had responded to Bryce's call. The shop was 350 miles from Kim's apartment. The employee from the repair shop, Christian, who had gone out to help Bryce, explained that Bryce had run out of gas at around 9:30 that morning. He gave him about 3 gallons worth of gas and then went on his way. But when he found out that his parents were having trouble getting a hold of him, he decided to drive back over to where he had first found Bryce to see if he was still there. Much to his surprise, Bryce was still in the exact same spot. So he walked over to him. He explained that he had Bryce's mother on the phone. The two of them spoke. They agreed that Bryce would get out on the road then, and all seemed to be okay. But when Bryce didn't arrive home at the time they had expected him to, and when he didn't answer their phone calls, his parents got the police involved. They pinged his phone, and lo and behold, he was still in the exact same spot. The police drove over there and spoke with Bryce, and he explained that he was just trying to blow off some steam before he got back on the road. They were a little bit skeptical, but after searching his car and performing a field sobriety test, they really had no reason to keep him there. They put him on the phone with his mom again, and he promised he'd get on the road. Everybody seemed fully convinced that Bryce would get back on the road at this point. So it was again really shocking when Christian, the repair shop employee, drove by a few hours later and Bryce still had not left the same spot. Christian ended up calling Bryce's mom and also walked over to Bryce's car to, inquire as to why he was still there. It was at this point that Bryce realized that he couldn't get away with putting the drive off any longer. Christian once again put Bryce on the phone with his mom. Bryce promised that he was absolutely getting on the road this time, and he did. Christian actually followed him for about 10 miles on the interstate, at which point he called Bryce's mom, let her know that Bryce was on his way home, and everybody thought that everything was okay. Bryce called his parents twice on the way home. The first call was to let them know that his GPS had him arriving home at around 3:25 a.m. The second call was to let them know that he was actually too tired to continue the drive and he was going to rest and then finish in the morning. His parents were woken up later that morning by California Highway Patrol, who advised them that their car had been involved in an accident. At this point, Bryce was nowhere to be found. According to investigators, the vehicle had driven off a 25-foot embankment before crashing in the road. But as investigators dug deeper, they came to a startling discovery. This accident wasn't actually an accident. It had appeared as though Bryce had slammed onto the accelerator prior to driving off the embankment. The car had also landed on its side and the glass was broken on the inside, meaning that Bryce was able to escape out of the vehicle. There was very little blood, which was not indicative of a serious injury, and there was no other signs that showed that Bryce had struggled at all. Based on Bryce's behavior prior to the accident and in the few weeks leading up to his disappearance, along with the fact that he had gifted one of his friends an Xbox and another one of his friends his mother's earrings, the police began to pursue the lead that perhaps Bryce had been suicidal. To this day, there have been no verified sightings of Bryce, but his family still holds out hope. There's an active Find Bryce Laspisa Facebook page, and anybody with leads is asked to report them either to the phone number or email listed above.
Hi, I want to know who this is. They're saying some really scary stuff to really young people.
She's asking a really good question. Everyone should be asking that question. Now, you've seen this user before.
You're white people. You're gonna have to start raising hell.
Yeah, her. Now, I haven't stitched any of her videos for two reasons. One, a bunch of other people were. And two, because based on this video she had posted even before that one, she definitely seemed to want my attention. And when I looked at her, I found nothing, which was odd. And in doing a little more research, I've come to a conclusion that a lot of people are probably going to think is crazy, but bear with me. I believe that she herself either is or is working directly on the behalf of Russian disinformation agents. Stay with me here. We already know that they exist and that they work within our social media to try and spread disinformation to divide us. Recently, I saw a video of a gentleman who works with an organization that parents contact when they feel their children have been indoctrinated to help them get out of it. He had some parents contact him. They said their 15-year-old daughter was posting neo-Nazi propaganda videos online. They were very concerned that they didn't raise her this way, and she had only started doing this after she began a relationship online with a 25-year-old male from the Midwest, her new boyfriend. So he got their daughter's info, he got the boyfriend's info, and for the next month he went on a deep dive. And you know what he found? Yeah, the 25-year-old from the Midwest was actually a 38-year-old from Russia. And he was doing this to at least 12 other girls, one of which I believe was 13. He communicated by email, he'd talk to them on the phone sometimes, he'd use Skype, but his video wouldn't work. And he was literally writing the scripts that they would use in their videos. And it wasn't just him. He was part of a network that ran hundreds of social media accounts, mainly posting through AI. And they also ran a ton of groups, like on Facebook. They had white nationalist groups and neo-Nazi groups and white supremacy groups. But they also had BLM and Antifa groups. You know why? You ever seen one of those posts that someone shares that's supposedly from like a BLM group, and it says something like, hey, protest here at this time, bring your bricks, or be ready to do this damage? Yeah, it came from one of their groups. They set up what looks like a legitimate BLM or Antifa group, and then they post stuff like that. And then their other groups take it and go, see, here's the proof, Antifa's. And then you have her, a fucking ghost that came out of nowhere with these extreme ideas that seems to be pointed at youth. She is either one of them, or she is working directly for one of them. Even if it's just a mindless puppet, it still makes her a horrible human being, and she shouldn't be here.
Imagine never seeing your son again. On September 5th of 1982, in West Des Moines, Iowa, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch, who was a paper boy, left his home that early Sunday morning to begin his paper route. Now, typically, his father, John Gosch, would accompany him when he came to doing the paper route. But on this particular morning, he did not. So Johnny went on his own. Johnny's parents became aware that he was missing when a lot of the people around the neighborhood started calling them, upset that they still hadn't gotten their paper. Knowing their son, Johnny's father, John, and his mother, Noreen, knew this was extremely unlike him and set out to look for him. Unfortunately, just 2 blocks away from their home, Johnny's father would find little Johnny's wagon full of newspaper, but no Johnny in sight. When Johnny's parents went to the authorities, they were told that there's no reason to send a search party out because he was probably just another runaway. This was the start of a very frustrating back and forth between Johnny's parents and the police. Now, there was a neighbor named Mike who stated that he saw Johnny speaking to a man who was stocky that was driving a two-tone blue Fairmont with Nebraska plates. He also stated that he has no idea what they were talking about because he was watching all this from his bedroom window. Another witness named John Rossi also saw a man in a blue car speaking to Johnny. He said that something felt strange to him about the conversation, so he looked at the man's license plate but could not recall the plate number. A few months after his disappearance, Noreen, who was Johnny's mother, stated that he was spotted in Oklahoma when a boy at a supermarket yelled that he was Johnny Gosch, but then was dragged off by two men. Nothing came out of this lead. Noreen, in the morning of 1997, claimed that around the age of when Johnny would have been 27 years old, him and another man who seemed to be the guy who took him came to her doorstep, showed her his scar, which would have proved that it was him, and stated that he was all right and that not to report this to anybody because it would be worse for him. They came inside, I believe they ate, they left, and Noreen didn't tell anybody until years later. Nobody knows if this is true or not, but she says it is. In 2006, Noreen would receive some pretty disturbing photos, which details I'm not going to go into, but if you want to see them, you can Google them. She stated that she was convinced that this was her son, but the scars and other things didn't match up to what would be his. So nothing came out of that either. All in all, this is still a cold case. He would be around 52 years old right now. Actually, he'd be turning 52 in about 6 days. He was born on November 12th. And there's speculation that he was put into an S ring, if you know what I mean, SX ring. But it can't be proven. So let me know your thoughts down below because this is wild and sad at the same time.
Axe murders are always horrific, but none of those stories hold a candle to what happened in this house. This is the story of the Villisca axe murders. On June 10th, 1912, Joe and Sarah Moore, along with their 4 children and 2 friends, the Stillingen sisters, would be brutally murdered. Sometime around midnight, someone broke into the house, and with an oil lamp in one hand and axe in the other, they killed everyone. Joe Moore's brother was the one who found the bodies, and they were bludgeoned so badly that their faces were a bloody pulp and they were unrecognizable. It made his brother violently ill. It gets weirder. It seems as if the killer went back through the house and performed some sort of odd ritual. He covered all of the mirrors and windows or any reflective glass with cloths or towels. They then went and covered the parents' faces with sheets and the children's faces with clothing. And then the killer did the weirdest thing yet. He took a 2-pound piece of uncooked bacon from the fridge, put it in the living room along with a keychain. On top of that, a bowl of water was found with blood swirling through it. Police think that the killer washed his hands in it, but they're not really sure. But it only gets weirder.
Now you guys, Amelia Bassoon and Joshua Ramswamy, they were a couple out of Orlando, Florida. Amelia was 25 and Joshua was 28, and Amelia was a bank teller. So as a bank teller, Amelia had a loyal customer that was elderly and he had dementia. So this loyal customer, his name has not been released, but whenever Amelia would move to a different location or a different bank, he would move his accounts to this different location or bank as well too. In 2018, Amelia started working at Chase Bank, in which this loyal customer moved his account to Chase Bank, and he trusted Amelia with his accounts because for years he had been, working with Amelia. But what he didn't know, y'all, was Amelia was not a nice person and she was planning on taking his money. Like I said before, this customer, he had dementia and he had other brain issues and he was really old, y'all. So they planned on taking advantage of him, Amelia and her husband. Now, in March of 2018, Amelia and her husband, they got together and they concocted this plan in order to take $50,000 from this customer. Now, they wrote 2 checks in the amount of $25,000 each, and they wrote them out to their son's name. And they actually thought that they would get away with this, you guys. But this elderly customer had a daughter that would look over his accounts by the name of Cynthia Stack, this woman right here. When Cynthia started seeing these large sums of money getting taken out of her father's account, that's when she started calling this bank to try to see what was happening. And she would ask to speak to Amelia personally because she knew her father built a personal relationship with Amelia over the years.
Was it last week Monday or the week before? She had called me about her dad's account.
What did she say?
They had went into the branch for like a transaction history, and they were just calling me to confirm about the funds, about like what's going on. And
Cindy called you? She called you at work?
Well, yes, at work. She was at that branch at Americana, and they called me down there. So I'll let her know when I get home. I'll talk to her. But the thing is, like,
Hold on, let me make sure I understand. So she called you, so the branch that she was at called you at your branch?
At my branch and at my cell phone.
Oh, they called both?
I believe so, yes. She was my desk phone. They called me at my desk. And I spoke to her over the phone. And she was just going through her dad's transaction history.
So what's so weird is Amelia then gives Cynthia a personal number and is like, look, I will talk to you when I get home. You can call my personal cell phone. Why would you give a customer your personal cell phone to call you about a $50,000 bank transaction? That seems like something you should talk about on the clock and with the manager. So Cynthia and her son Sean right here, they are very suspicious. They know something is going on.
Technically, you're not supposed to be talking on the cell phone with a client or customer anyway, right?
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
So you're not worried about that. You were just worried about giving her information about Joe.
Exactly.
So what did she ask you about?
She was just asking me about the transaction history on the account, but I'm trying to let her know that I can't. She was asking about that.
Did you do that?
Yes.
Were they at the branch for that?
Sean was, yes.
Sean was. Okay. So what else? What else did you guys talk about on the phone?
That was really it. She just kept calling me about the transaction history.
She kept calling you? How many times did she call you?
She called me. When did she call me? She called me that day. She called me the day after. And then I think she skipped a day and called me one day after that as well.
So Amelia and Joshua, they know now that Cynthia and her son Sean, they're catching on to what they did to her father. Cynthia is calling back to back. She's literally like, look, y'all need to come up with these $50,000 or come up with what happened to my father's money or we're going to the police. So instead of Amelia and Joshua just saying, look, let me go turn myself in and just get this over with because I stole this elderly man's money, they come up with this elaborate plan to try to kill Cynthia and her son. Joshua goes out, he buys a gun, and he goes over to Cynthia and Sean's apartment. Now, a neighbor reports it hearing about 5 gunshots, you guys, and that was about it. Now, the very next day, a neighbor went over and saw the door was wide open, and that's when the discovery was made. Cynthia and Sean was shot to death.
5-year-old Amelia Bassoon and 28-year-old Joshua Ramsey remain in the Orange County Jail tonight. Behind their first-degree murder charges, a list of others that include scheme to defraud and identity theft from March. Those charges could stem from theft at J.P. Morgan that Bassoon is accused of being part of. A representative with the local branch confirmed to News 6 she works for the company, and they say she stole $50,000 from an elderly customer. That customer, the representative told us, is the father and grandfather of the 2 victims. They sent us this statement saying, quote, "We are so sorry about this terrible tragedy, and our hearts go out to the family of these victims. We are continuing to work with authorities on the investigation and have restored the missing money to the customer's account." Orlando police wouldn't confirm this on their end, citing the open investigation. During Saturday's first appearance, Ramsey remained silent.
You're here today for first-degree murder, 2 counts, principal in the first degree.
Bassoon seemed to be in disbelief.
Once Amelia and Joshua were interrogated, they ended up being arrested because their stories did not add up. Now, Amelia claims that she had no idea that Joshua was going to do this. She's claiming that Joshua disappeared for a couple of days, and all she knew was she saw bank transactions for gas, like he went out of town, and she didn't know where he went. She said he had texted her saying that I'm going to take care of this. You have nothing to worry about. But she had no idea that he was going to kill Cynthia and Sean. But Joshua tells a totally different story.
I'll tell you right now, straight up, I was there. My gun was taken from me by some black guy that said he knows Jay. Amelia gave him $10,000. I thought the money was gonna go get paid as far as, okay, this is gonna get get paid. Maybe they're buying drugs or something. So the money, presumably this $10,000, would have come out of a TD account? No, that was cash she had at home. How did she have $10,000 cash? From what I brought home. Okay. So the thing is, what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, one of you is a really awful person. You know, someone is letting their spouse go to prison for the rest of their life.
So Joshua is saying that Amelia paid somebody $10,000 in order to take care of the situation and make it go away. But that's not what Amelia is saying. But y'all, in a strange twist of events, as of right now in 2021, Joshua is currently serving a life sentence while Amelia is just out. Now, she did do 3 years, but she got time served, I'm guessing, for the fraud when the $50,000 was took. But they could not prove that she had anything to do with the actual killings of Cynthia and Sean. The gun used was traced back to Joshua, and it was proven that he's the one that did commit the murders. Now, you guys, I don't know about this one. In my heart now, I do think that she knew about the murders. For some reason, I feel like she manipulated him into doing this in order for her to not get in trouble or not go to jail. Now, I'm going to say allegedly or whatever for legal reasons. But it's something about this woman. I don't know, the whole time I did this story, I just did not get a good vibe from her. Now, comment down below and let me know what you guys think. Do y'all think Josh got tricked into doing this? Now, I don't think Josh is innocent. I think Josh very well did do what he did, and he's where he needs to be. But I don't think she should have got off like that with just 3 years time served. I don't think that. Comment below, y'all.
This is 55-year-old Yoselin Ortega, and she brutally murdered 2 out of the 3 children that she was nannying for. But let's back up a little bit first. This is Marina and Kevin Krim from New York. They had 3 children together, 6-year-old Lucia, who they often called Lulu, almost 2-year-old Leo, and 3-year-old Nessie. Marina was a stay-at-home mother, and Kevin often had to travel long distances for work, so they both decided to get a nanny to help Marina out. Yoselin's sister reached out to the Krim family and recommended her to them. And Yoselin also was nannying for another family that lived in their neighborhood. Yoselin Ortega was from the Dominican Republic. She was working about 25 hours a week with the Krim family. She seemed to be very well paid. And the family also even paid for a trip to the Dominican Republic with her and paid for the whole 9 days. And the 3 children had a very good relationship with her and really loved her. And this great relationship went on for about 2 years. October 25th of 2012, Marina took her 3-year-old daughter Nessie to a swim lesson. 6-year-old Lucia had a ballet class later on that day, and the nanny, Yoselin, was told to drop her off at her class, and that the mother, Marina, would pick her up on her way home from the swim lesson with Nessie. Marina is in shock when she goes to pick up Lucia from her ballet class with Nessie, and she finds out that Lucia never showed up for her class. So Marina panics and tries to call Yoselin, but she gets absolutely no answer. Once Marina gets home, she is struck by a really eerie silence in the home, and it was also very dark except for a light showing from the bathroom. Once she gets into the bathroom, she sees that Lucia and Leo are in the bathroom with the nanny, and they had all been stabbed. The 2 children were laying in the bathtub side by side, and they were both stabbed with such force that they were nearly decapitated. Lucia had defensive wounds from trying to escape her attacker, and she was stabbed over 30 times, while Leo was stabbed over 5 times. Meanwhile, the nanny, Yoselin, is still alive. She has a slash on her neck and stab wounds here and there. And police immediately make Yoselin the primary suspect. And I am running out of time, so come back for a part 2. This is part 2 of Yoselin Ortega, the nanny. We left off with the police making Yoselin the primary suspect in the murder of Lucia and Leo. Now, fast forwarding to the trial of Yoselin Ortega, the prosecution does state that they believe that Yoselin was jealous of the mother Marina, as well as being resentful towards Marina and Kevin for her financial struggles. Yoselin stated that she could no longer pay for her rent or pay for her son to go to private school. She also expressed that she was angry with the parents for constantly changing her schedule and also asking her to clean when she said that was not part of her job. Yoselin's attorney also did try to fight with the jury and explain to them that she was mentally ill and was having hallucinations and hearing voices at the time of the murders. Ultimately, the judge finds Yoselin guilty of murdering Leo and Lucia, and she is convicted of 2 counts each of first-degree and second-degree murder. She gets 2 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life. Later down the line, Marina and Kevin have 2 more children, and they begin the Leo and Lulu Fund, which is used to foster creativity among children. The Lulu and Leo law was also introduced in New York State, which made falsifying applications or references in childcare an official crime.
All right, by follower request, here it is, the first case that I ever worked on TikTok. This is former officer Adam Holland of Aurora, Colorado. It is important and vital to this story that you know that he resigned mysteriously and without reason from his police department on November 1st of 2021. And I think we've all been doing this long enough to know what that actually means. We seriously doubt that this was by choice. Now, it was the night before Thanksgiving when 17-year-old Peyton Blitstein and 4 of his friends were going out for the night. One of the girls had to stop by her house to change her clothes and grab her debit card real quick. And on the way home, Adam Holland followed them. He was convinced that they were driving recklessly and decided to confront them. Thankfully, this entire interaction was caught on doorbell cam, or else Adam Holland might have gotten away with murder. Before I show you the doorbell cam footage of the last moments of Peyton's life, it's important to remember that Holland had a blood alcohol level of 0.193, and he also tested positive for cannabis. For those who don't speak bartender, he was essentially about 10 minutes away from being blackout drunk. Now, the car with its blinker on is the kids' car. All 5 of them were in there, and Holland is in the white vehicle next to it.
People in there. Hey, let me see the police. Hey, don't. Bro, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want?
I have a camera. I'm calling the cops.
I got somebody who wants you to come to my neighborhood. That's all.
Then you could have asked me. I'm gonna be a creep all pulling up to my house like that.
Okay, so it's your neighborhood that you're speaking. How is your neighborhood? We don't know it's my neighborhood. You want all this money? I own all of it. You don't drive it. Go back to drive, bro. Go back to drive. This is not your neighborhood. That's your life.
There's where I have to cut off the video because in the next moments, Adam Holland comes around the back of his car with his weapon raised towards the children. Peyton fires a shot in self-defense, and then unfortunately his gun jammed. Holland then empties his clip into Peyton, the force of which is so hard, one of his shoes flies off. All right, now that you're caught up on the video, let's deep dive. So what happened the night that Adam Holland ended the life of 17-year-old Peyton Blitstein? First, a little background on Peyton and who he was as a person. But instead of me telling you about it, I want to take you on the same path that I took when I first learned about Peyton. In the very first conversation I had with Peyton's stepmother, I asked her to tell me about him. And there was just such love and pride in the way that she described him and his ambitions. He wanted to be a fighter pilot in the Air Force. It was his biggest dream ever since he was a kid. Here, go ahead and pause and read. Peyton was also of indigenous heritage. He was a registered member of the Osage tribe. And as I am making this video, I am just now realizing the painful irony of the fact he lost his life on Thanksgiving. But just keep that in the back of your mind for later on. So what you saw on the ring cam was the beginning of the entire altercation. Now, Adam had come from his mother's house. His sister was in town for the holidays. They had watched a football game and he was heading home. Now, he claims that these kids were weaving in and out of traffic, crossing lanes, they were speeding, and he was just fed up with it because he'd seen this car do it a bunch of times before, and so he was going to follow them home. The young girl who was driving, we'll call her B, she stops in front of her house in the middle of the street. You know how you are when you're a kid, and you just kind of stop because you're just popping in. And then that's when Adam pulled up beside them and just didn't say anything. It also just so happens that Adam lived like on the next street, like 5 houses down around a curve. So I know there was a lot going on as far as the conversation in that video. And I studied it for hours, just translating it before the affidavit come out. And when the affidavit come out, T, we'll call him, who is Peyton's best friend, was able to clarify some of the things that we could hear. But there was one I missed that was crucial to this entire case. While still sitting in the truck, Adam actually pointed his gun at T. And I've studied this video enough that the movements definitely corroborate this story. And if you listen to this exact interaction again, you can hear T saying it. Listen.
What do you want? What do you want? I have a camera.
Go back and just listen to the audio as many times as you need to. T says, bro, what do you want? Adam says, what do you want? This is the moment he pulls out his gun and points it at T. Adam says again, what do you want? And underneath the next layer of dialogue, you can hear him say something about him pointing a gun. B says, I have a camera. And clear as day, you can hear T in a complete tone of disbelief. I swear to God on my effing life. And now this is where Peyton's weapon comes into the picture, which we'll talk about in part 3. So a question a lot of people were asking was, why was 17-year-old Peyton armed? When I first reported on this story last year, that was a question that was up in the air. To me, it didn't matter, but to a lot of people who were trying to put the blame on Peyton back then, yeah, that was their excuse. Well, now we finally have that answer in what seems to be eerie foreshadowing. According to Peyton's father, Todd, he'd been having reoccurring nightmares where someone was going to shoot him. And this lines up with what his friends said during the initial interviews. At the time, all they said was he was scared of something and that he didn't feel safe and that he felt like somebody was after him. Obviously, I cannot show you the video of what happened that night, but here are stills from the official affidavit from the police report. Holden claimed that Peyton had at what was called low ready, where it's in your hands pointed towards the ground. But as you can see from these photographs, it's quite clear that he does not. And you can tell Adam Holden has not yet raised his weapon as he comes around the corner. And as we can clearly see in the next frame, Adam has raised up his arms. We can see Holden charging the 2 children, and then that's when Peyton finally raises his arm. Peyton was defending himself and his friends who were being threatened by this man. Now that I'm re-examining this case again and the skills that I've built up over the last year, I've realized some new things, and one of them was, look how tall Peyton is. You can see he's a pretty tall kid. According to the police affidavit, Holden is 5'9", so he's smaller. Looking at the pictures that were taken in the hospital, Holden, the entrance wound was right on his hip, right above his leg. And then the exit wound was his buttocks. Meaning Peyton was just trying to shoot his leg to stop him from charging at them. And with 9 bullets, Holden had shot him 4 times in the torso, once in his left forearm. Meaning that he was aiming to, quote, eliminate the threat. Peyton had been training to serve in the military since he was 10 years old. Here is him as a Sea Cadet. Here he is practicing folding on a hoodie when he's a kid. And while this child lay on the ground taking his last breaths, Holden left the scene of the accident without doing any sort of medical aid to go home and park his car. In fact, he never performed any resuscitative acts because B's mother was there at the time and she was the one doing chest compressions. We can see it all on the video. Holden just came back and was trying to convince himself and everyone in the ambulance that he was still breathing, that he had a pulse when he did not. In part 4, we're going to go through the affidavit and I'm going to show you how Adam Holden lied. Holden's actions that night are directly correlated to the way that police are trained and the way they are taught to cover their tracks. And now I'm going to leave you with a sound that haunts me to this day. It wasn't until the police affidavit was leaked that we got an idea of the full scope of the lies that former officer Adam Holland was telling in order to try and justify the shooting death of Peyton Blitstein. The way that he had to twist and turn the entire narrative to try and make it look like he was a hero and that Peyton was a bad guy. By the time Adam Holland went to the police station to give his official statement, the doorbell cam footage had been released, and he claimed that he hadn't seen it. However, a lot of his details conveniently changed. During the interview at the police station, the first words out of his mouth are a lie when he tells the detectives that he only had 2 beers during the game he was watching at his mother's house. And then the detective asked him if he had consumed marijuana, and he said not since college. Yeah, except the hospital said that he had a 0.193 blood alcohol content and tested positive for cannabis. Also, he was treated for an STD. Really makes me wonder what was redacted here. One thing that didn't change in his story, however, probably because they didn't catch this part on the doorbell cam footage, so he didn't change his story, was that both the night of the shooting and in the interview, he thought that T, the young man, was the driver, not B, the young lady. So he thought the black boy was driving, not the little blonde girl. He also wrongly remembers a young black driver in the same car speeding back in 4th of July. Now, according to the body cam footage of that night, Holland claimed that 3 dudes got out of the car and surrounded him. They were trying to flex on him. They were saying, F you, I'm gonna F you up. Which we know is not true because on the doorbell cam footage, it clearly shows that Peyton and the other kid, who we'll call Jay, didn't even get out of the car until after Holland flashed his weapon at T. The detective during the interview at the police station even confronted him about that, and he admitted that only one of them came up to him. On the body cam, he claimed that he had just retired a week ago, when we know he resigned 3 weeks ago. But right around here is when his whole story changes. Now, the night of Thanksgiving, on the body cam footage, he tells officers that he got out of the car because he thought stuff was about to go down, so he had his pistol at low and ready. And he admits that he had his pew-pew out before Peyton did. But it's because 3 dudes were flexing on him. However, in the interview at the police station, he says, well, I saw this older lady who looked like she might be the mom, and I went to go talk to the adult in the situation after the kids were being so disrespectful. Yeah, except Amber, B's mother, wasn't even on the porch at that time. She was just coming down the stairs. She didn't even wake up until she heard her daughter slam the front door, and that's when she activated the ring cam to look and see what was going on. I timed it. It was 45 seconds in between the time B went in the house and when he got out of the truck. He lied so much, I've run out of time and I have to do a part 5.